Hi, it's Jo from Minerva. Today I would like to introduce you to McCall's 7322, which is a really versatile pattern for a top, and it is level 1, learn to sew. So if you're new to sewing, this is a great place to start. The video today will be view E, which is for a woven fabric. There's also options on here for a long sleeve and a short sleeve t-shirt using a stretch knit. So I'll show you those in a separate video because they have different skills. The pattern has lots of views and lots of fabric choices. So there is a long sleeve t-shirt, a short sleeve t-shirt, a shell top sleeveless and a shell top with sleeves. It's quite a long length, so you would want to measure your underarm to your hip to see how long you would like your garment, and there is a lengthen and shorten line which I can show you how to use. Before you start your pattern, it's a good idea to measure yourself, so you'll need to do your upper bust, which is across here, and choose your pattern size. It's quite a free and easy pattern sizing with some ease. It's a extra small, small, medium, large. This pattern is the extra small, small and medium. So if you want the larger size, you'll need the different size up. And you need to measure, there's quite a lot of these. If you need to do a full bust adjustment or a small bust adjustment, you can find a tutorial for that on Minerva TV too. The technique I use for cutting out is to cut out the pattern pieces and then trace off the size that I want with a carbon paper and a wheel. That's my style because I make samples and I make lots of different garments, so I make them all for different people, so I need lots of different sizes. You can cut out the tissue and pin it to your fabric and cut around, that's fine too. But sometimes if you're not sure of a size, if you trace it off, it's quite good because then you can always move up or down a size. The fabric that I'm using today is a Minerva Exclusive Viscose. And if you've not worked with viscose before, it's really, really drapey. It's got really nice movement, really soft hand. It's not got a sheen, it's got quite a matte finish. And it's opaque enough to wear as a top without being lined. If you can't see me, just maybe my outline. And this one has a little bit of give in the cross grain and not so much give on the straight grain. So I'm using the one with the tigers so that you can see. So the straight grain is the tigers head to tail, and the cross grain is front paws to tail. I'm going to show you how to cut that out over at the cutting table. There are a few tips that will pop up to help you, but there's a few things to note with cutting viscose. It's very slippy, so you need to make sure that you've smoothed out all of your wrinkles and you've found the grain line. So you've found your fabric on the center. You can fold the two sides in, the two selvage sides in, and then you'll get two side cuts. It's quite easy to see with the tiger fabric because you can see which way up I've got it and whether I'm going across the cross grain. If you are cutting the facings, I like to cut the facings ready interfaced. So I interface a piece of fabric and then put the facing pieces on because it's such a drapey fabric, especially when you cut it across the weave, that you can never really cut an interfacing piece and a neck piece the same. It's easier to interface a piece of fabric, and you don't waste any more interfacing really than if you're cutting little bits of it and trying to iron them together. I've used dressmaking pins because they're really small and fine today, and I wanted to use quite a few of them to make sure that I've matched up all the tigers and I found my grain line. when we sew today, I'm going to be showing lots of basic skills. So if you're an intermediate sewer, you might find this a little bit slow for you. But if you're brand new to sewing and you've been inspired by TV programme or the feed on Minerva and all the beautiful things that pop up, then I'm going to show you all the little steps that make up the top. I'm going to make view E, which is the sleeveless version. So I'll be showing you how to put on facing around the neck and armhole facings, and they're separate on this pattern. And I'll be showing you a few simple finishing techniques. I'm going to try and work as if I was new to sewing too, like you. So I'm not going to use my overlocker. I'm just going to use my sewing machine and use a zigzag to finish my edges. Don't pull these easing stitches up any more yet. You're going to use a little notch on the side to help you match up the lengths, the side lengths. So this is the back and the front, and they go right sides together. An RST on a pattern, or right sides together, means you're going to put the right side of the fabric touching each other. The right sides together. You should have some little notches on the shoulders. You match up the notches. And then match up the side seams, and I'll show you how to use that easing stitch. So once you've got the shoulders matched, you can then move to the sides. So I'm going to match the hem first. And then I'm going to match under the arm second. And now I'm going to use that easing stitch. I can pull on one of the threads if I need to make one side a little bit shorter than another side, so that both lengths of fabric are the same. And you can see here I've got some little ripples, and that means that one piece of fabric is slightly longer than the other piece, but it will give a little bust room. This fabric is actually great. This exclusive viscose is great because it has got some stretch on the width, on the cross grain, so you will get a little bit of ease across the armholes and the bust area. So now both lengths of my side are the same length. It's important now that you use the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, because the underarm and the shoulder seam need to have used up the right amount of fabric to then put the facing in, and the facing will finish the edge of the sleeve. So you must keep that the same. If it helps you, you can always use a pencil and give yourself a little guideline. This is a chalk line. And you can draw it on, and then you definitely know that you're doing the right seam allowance under the arms and over the shoulders so that the facings fit. Sew the sides with a straight stitch. If you're new to sewing, don't sew over pins, because you can catch a needle on it and bend it, and take them out as you go along. And when you start a piece of sewing from the raw edge, take a few stitches forward, find your back button and take a few stitches back, and that will secure the ends, which means that then you can snip the ends off at the end and you don't have to tie them. Sewing at 1.5 seam allowance doesn't mean using the edge of the foot, so you will have a little bit of fabric left over. So when you measure 1.5, it won't necessarily be right up to the edge of your foot. You can use the lines on your foot plate, so you will get 5/8 on here, but you will run the fabric along one of the guidelines on the foot. Keep all your ends tidy, because you'll have the threads from the seam and the threads from the easing stitch. You can cut all of those off now and keep them out of the way. And your easing stitch should be inside the seam allowance. Then you can sew the shoulder seams and trim those too. I'm going to finish these side seams off so that they don't come undone and start fraying. This is where you use a zigzag stitch. I'm going to zigzag the two seams together because it's a very floppy material. If it was a thicker fabric on a different pattern, I would press this seam open like this and then zigzag down each side. But because this is nice and floppy and quite a casual pattern fit, I'm going to zigzag. It's important now to get into the habit of pressing your seams. So I'm going to press this seam to the back, and it will help me to get the facings in really nice and smoothly, because I won't lose a few millimetres at the top there. It will all be pressed flat. The facings will be pressed flat, so I'm making sure that the pieces that I'm joining together are the right size. And some of these places you can't get to once your construction is finished. So try and avoid just sort of pressing your item at the end. Keep pressing as you go. If you don't have room for a big ironing board while you're sewing, one of these little sleeve boards is perfect. So press from the wrong side just to check that the iron's fine with the fabric, and then you can press from the right side. Try and press rather than drag. If you drag, you'll move and it's the weave of the fabric and then reset it. So do the moving with your fingers and then press with the iron. Shoulder seams are normally pressed to the back and side seams pressed open, or in this case pressed to the back. And it makes your seams invisible. Number 5 on the pattern instructions is to make the facings. Facings are an extra bit of fabric that extends beyond the neckline on the inside, and that makes the front neck lie really flat and it won't curl down. So you should mark the notches on them, because once you take the paper pieces off, it's quite tricky to see which is which. I've missed a notch there. And do a little snip into the seam, and that will show me that that one is the front neck facing, and because it's cut on the fold, I now get the shape of the front neck. And this one was cut on the fold, and this is shorter now, look, so this is the back neck. I'm going to join them together at the shoulder seams, and those little notches that I made will line it up. And now you can see why it's important to keep the 1.5 seam allowance, because this curve shape needs to fit into the vest shape with the seams matching. There's a few ways you can finish the edge of this. You can zigzag around the edge, or you can fold over a really small hem and sew that down with a 6mm seam allowance, just so that it's really tiny. But I'm using zigzag throughout, so I'm going to continue with that method. I went round once with a small zigzag and then once with a large zigzag on top, so that's not going to fray now. Don't go too close to the edge. If you go, let's see if I can find somewhere. If you go too close to the edge, you sort of chew it a little bit, so make sure that you're just on the edge of the fabric. Okay, now we're going to put the neckband, this neck facing, around the neck. We're going to start by matching up the edges. I'm going to use some slightly bigger pins now so that I can see what's happening. So the seam running along the facing will run along the seam of the shoulder. And then there are notches all the way around that we can match up. And that means that the neck facing fits exactly into the shape of the neck. And that's why we need these seam allowances to be exactly the same, because if we'd made the seam allowance on the shoulder smaller, then we would have lots and lots of bagginess, and if we'd made it bigger, then the neckband wouldn't fit in. So you will get a little bit of slack. Can you see that I've got a little bit of slack there on the top? And this is called easing. It's where you ease a shorter length of fabric, which is our neckband with the interfacing on, with a longer length of fabric, which is our top. It's not much longer, it's long enough for that curved edge to fold in. And the way you ease is you find the center point and pin it. And then you can see now, look, I've got a different amount of fabric here to here. So I'm going to ease them in by pulling on the one and letting the other one stay slack. You do get a feel for it the more you do it. You realise how much to stretch the one and how much to let the other piece of fabric relax. You can keep changing them, moving them along. Got a notch there with a notch there. This time I'm putting my pins in vertically so that I can keep moving the pins around and I can pull them out easily from the side. You see there, look, I've got a little bit of a balloon, so I'm going to ease that down and pin it in place. When you put your pins in vertically, you can put more pins in to hold down the ease. If you put them horizontally, it sort of holds two straight lengths together. But if you need to ease, there's another little bubble there, look. So if I just flatten it out with my thumb, I can put another pin in, so I can keep easing in this extra fabric. And once the neck facing is pinned, you can tack that if you want to. If you feel more confident, you could tack the 1.5 seam allowance and that would give you a little guide. Or you can sew straight away with the pins in and pull the pins out as you go. Attaching the neckband is the first part of preparing a really good smooth neckband. The next is to take out half of the seam allowance from the facing piece. So that's the piece with the interfacing on, because that's going to be too bulky. So I'm going to take some of that off. And it will also take out that seam allowance there. And you need really good scissors, and you need small scissors. When I first started sewing, I'd be sort of going at this with a pair of dressmaking scissors, and then sometimes you'd make a little snip and it would be in your actual top. So these little scissors are perfect. The tips are sharp and they're easy to control. So now we've got less bulk around the neck of the thick fabric. Now we're going to do a technique which you will find useful in lots of sewing, especially on necklines. We're going to understitch, and understitching keeps this facing on the inside, otherwise it will keep flapping out even if we press it. So what we're going to do is we're going to press this facing towards the seam allowance, so the inside of the facing will touch the insides of our seam allowance. I'll just pin it to show you. So all of the seam allowance is now touching the facing. There's nothing touching the top at all. And that means now we've made quite a heavy ridge along there. And so what happens is the facing hangs away from the neck edge. So we're going to get the iron and press this facing towards the seam allowance. Going to put your work under the machine, top on the left, facing on the right. That might look opposite to you with my selfie screen, but you need your facing on the inside aperture, and your needle needs to go down and it needs to touch the facing, not your top. And you're going to sew with a straight stitch along the line of the facing. You're not sewing the top, you're only sewing the facing and all of that seam allowance to the facing. So all of that then will be a little sandwich on its own. Your stitch line will be just 2 millimeters from the edge of the top. Once you've gone all the way around, now you can turn all of the facing to the inside. And you can give that a final press. If you're getting a little bit of rippling around the back neck, you can clip that seam there, and you can see that it's pulling tighter than the ripple. So if I snip, now the fabric can peel open a little bit more. But I'm not going through the seam line. All of those snips now enable that seam to roll out flat. final part of a facing is to make sure it stays put, and that is to tack the ends down. So here where this is shoulder seam is, press it down and then you tack the facing to the seam allowance, so you don't see anything from the front, you're just holding the seam allowance to the facing to stop it flapping out. A good press on the facing. Now you'll see what the understitching does. It really does make the front of the top hang directly away from the facing, and the same on the other side. Once you've learned how to put a neck facing on, then it's exactly the same procedure for the armhole facing. So you join them front and back, match up the notches, sew it, match up the seams with a pin, sew around, clip the curves, understitch, finish your outer edge. All of the same procedures that you did for the neck hole facing, you're going to do the same for the armhole. It was important when you cut out the armhole facing that the grain line was in the right place, because you can see that that's the straight bit of your arm coming down here, so that's on the straight grain, and then as it curves under your arm, you're then moving your fabric to the cross grain, so you'll get a little bit more movement there. Again, you'll need that clipping to get it really nice and smooth around your arm. I'll leave you to put on your own armhole facings using the same skills. I've put in the one sleeve facing and I've got the second one to do. I'm just making sure I've put one pin where there's one notch, and that's going to match the sleeve front, because one notch means sleeve front and two notches mean sleeve back. So make sure you've got the right facing on the right side, because they're not exactly the same curve. So look for that one notch front, two notch back, and match the same on your facing. When you've tried your top on and you've decided what hem length you want, there are hem lengths provided in the pattern. You can choose your own. I've got this super tool called a hot hemmer, which I love to use, especially on viscose fabrics, because it's quite movable fabric. This means that I can turn up a 2 centimetre hem and iron on top. And then I can use that to turn up again, and I can use the hot hemmer again if I want a wide hem on the bottom, or I can take that raw edge to the folded edge and have a narrow hem. I'm going to make a narrow hem by folding the raw edge down to the press line that I just made. Pin round, and I could press again if I wanted to. These are glass head pins, so I can iron over these without them melting. And then we can run the machine around the hemline. So here's your top finished. There aren't any fastenings, so it's an over the head vest. I'm just going to show you the inside so that you can check your construction. So the armhole facing goes over the top of the neck facing, and you'll have zigzagged around there to stop that fraying. You've got a little tack here holding it onto the seam allowance. I've used a small hem, a smaller hem than the pattern suggests, but it's for a younger person, so I didn't want it to have a really big deep hem on, just a slim hem. And you'll see how the understitching allows the top to hang without any of the facing curling or rolling over to the front. And that is McCall's 7322. This is the Minerva Exclusive Print Viscose. It's got a beautiful movement to it. Lovely summery top. It's opaque, so it doesn't need an upper lining. It's a really smooth hand. And it's got a sort of cotton look, but more drape. And there's a huge range of new prints to choose from. Check out our website and find the one that you like. I hope you've enjoyed that sew along and it's given you the confidence to try McCall's 7322. There's lots of views. It can fit lots of different body shapes depending if you want sleeves or not sleeves, and you can change the sizing of it quite easily too. If you have any questions because you're just starting out in your sewing journey, please put those below, and you will see that all the products that I've used are listed below over at the Minerva website, so that you can get started on your sewing journey. Thank you very much for watching. Do come back when I will make the long sleeve and short sleeve t-shirt knit versions of McCall's 7322. Thanks very much for watching. See you again soon.